let's start with the ceasefire. And there's a lot of discussion about who actually got this deal over the line. Was it this administration, or was it the presence of people from the incoming administration that was able to do it? I recognize that you guys have pretty much welcomed the Trump administration's involvement in this. Why?
Let me say a few things first before I get to the specific question of why we have welcomed their support. The first is that this ceasefire agreement is an agreement that was conceived of by this administration, that this administration traveled the world to garner support for, and that members from Secretary Blinken on down put their credibility behind. There are a number of things I think that went into getting here today, but if you look at the most important, or let me give you two really important factors before I get to the question about President-elect Trump's involvement. I think the most important factor was that after the president laid out this proposal publicly at the end of May, Secretary Blinken and other members of the United States government went around the world generating support for this proposal, and won the endorsement of not just countries in Europe, but countries across the Middle East, Arab and Muslim countries across the Middle East that said they supported this proposal. It won the endorsement of the United Nations Security Council. And what that did is it left Hamas isolated and alone. And I can tell you that we began to see a weakening of Hamas's position after that diplomatic campaign that we executed. The other thing that I think was critical to getting us here today is Hamas finally realized that the broader regional war that they had been hoping to achieve since October 7th, the broader regional war that was part of their original strategic effort, that they weren't going to get that their allies in Hezbollah were weakened and decimated, that Iran was not going to come to their aid, was not going to launch a full regional war, and that was to some extent because of the work that the United States did to prevent that from happening. And that the fall of Syria showed that one of their last allies was, fall of the Syrian regime, I should say, that one of their last allies was erased from the map. So I think you add those things together, you had in Hamas, first, a terrorist organization that was isolated, and then it eventually left realizing that it really had no choice but to accept a ceasefire because the strategic goal that they wanted to achieve for so long just wasn't going to happen. Now, when it comes to the involvement of President-elect Trump's team, it has been absolutely critical in getting this deal over the line. And it's been critical because, obviously, as I stand here today, this administration's term in office will expire in 5 days. And one of the things that we have always said about this deal is that when you get from stage 1 to stage 2, that the United States, Egypt, and Qatar are the guarantors of this deal. And Egypt and Qatar will push Hamas to stay at the bargaining table and to get from stage 1 to stage 2, and the United States will push Israel to stay at the bargaining table to get from phase 1 and phase 2. So obviously those are promises we cannot make on behalf of the United States for any longer than the next 5 days. And so it's critical that all of the parties to the agreement and the other mediators see that when the United States is in the room making commitments, those are lasting commitments that extend beyond this administration into the next one. I would just say, lastly, I don't know if it's unprecedented to have envoys from an outgoing and an incoming administration sitting at the same table negotiating a ceasefire agreement of this kind. But if it's not unprecedented, it's certainly unusual. And we, of course, thank the Trump team for working with this on this ceasefire agreement. We think it's important that they were at the table. And I think it shows that when Americans are willing to work together across partisan lines, as we were willing to do on this occasion, because it's in the national interest of the United States, there's a lot that we can get done.
So as you know, over the course of the last year, as this has been being negotiated, getting from phase one to phase two, which is critical, has never been guaranteed. And in fact, a lot of people don't think it will ever happen.
Yeah.
It's just, do you have confidence that the incoming administration is going to push for phase two as much as you guys had been or would have done had President Biden been reelected?
I, of course, can't speak for what the incoming administration can do. What I can say is it is very much in the interest of the incoming administration to push to turn this agreement from phase one into a lasting end to the war, which is what happens when you get to phase two and phase three. There are hostages that will continue to be held after the expiration of phase one, and it's in the interest of everyone to see that those hostages return home. It is in the interest of everyone that the war that will stop upon the completion of the ceasefire agreement does not resume at the end of 6 weeks or subsequent to that if negotiations have extended beyond the opening 6 weeks. So it is very much in their interest, just as we believe it is in the interest of Israel that this turn into a lasting peace. If you look at all the conditions have to be right for a deal to come together. And if you look at the conditions from an Israeli point of view, you've heard me speak to this from the podium before, and you've heard Secretary Blinken speak to it. Israel had really achieved all of its major strategic goals already in Gaza. They had decimated Hamas's military capabilities. They had wiped out the leadership that existed on October 7th, including Yahya Sinwar himself, the military leader of Hamas. So it's very much in Israel's strategic interest that this war not reopen in 6 weeks, and that they're left fighting the same kind of battles over and over again as Hamas recruits new militants to replace the ones that Israel's killing on the battlefield.
But you don't buy this line that the president-elect's relationship or influence with Prime Minister Netanyahu was the thing that pushed it over the line.
Not only do I not buy it, it's not what we've seen in the negotiations. We've seen that the important factor when it comes to their involvement has been the continuity that it shows, having both the outgoing administration and the incoming administration there at the table.
And my last one, really quickly, I think that you said this, or you at least strongly implied it, but your belief, your position is, or the administration's belief and position is that the destruction that was wrought in Gaza by Israel is what did this, and that your support of what the Israelis did is what brought Hamas.
No, that's not what I meant at all. What I mean was the destruction of Hamas's capabilities. Now,
Yes, at the same time as there was the destruction of Hamas's capabilities, there was also the destruction of huge amounts.
But I don't think Hamas cares about the destruction of civilian infrastructure. I don't think they care about the loss of civilian.
Do you care about the destruction?
We absolutely do. It's why I've been trying to get this ceasefire all along. But I don't think that is a calculation that has in any meaningful way entered into Hamas's thinking, and especially when you look at the fact that Sinwar himself said that it is the mass loss of civilian life inside Gaza that he thought would strengthen Hamas's position. So no, I don't think it was the loss of civilian life that has led Hamas to ultimately agree to this deal. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. And I extend the thanks
Thank you.
to you. And I want to start by a question that might link both what the Secretary Blinken said yesterday in the Atlantic Council and the announcement of reaching the agreement today. Secretary Blinken yesterday gave some brief details about the day after plan that he said that he submitted to the upcoming administration, and it's all based on the fact that Hamas will no longer rule the Gaza Strip by creating this temporary administration, then giving it to the Palestinian Authority. Is there something in the deal that agreed upon between all parties that Hamas will leave power in Gaza to allow for the plan to be implemented?
When when you say the deal, do you mean the day after arrangements
No,
that the
no, no,
Secretary
no,
was
this
speaking
deal,
to?
the ceasefire
The
deal.
ceasefire proposal that's on the table today, what has been agreed to so far is phase one. The ultimate resolution of governance, security, reconstruction, all of those will have to be dealt with in the negotiations from phase one to phase two, including that question of who governs Gaza. I can tell you that the United States is committed to ensuring that Hamas never again resumes governing Gaza. I think I can say with some certainty that a reemergence of Hamas governing Gaza would be an absolute deal breaker for Israel, as it should be, when you saw what happened on October 7th. And I would hope that it would be a deal breaker for the Palestinian people, who have seen the loss of more than 45,000 individuals over the last 15 months in a war that Hamas started. So I would hope it would be a deal breaker for all parties, but that is something that will be the subject of negotiations going forward. We have made clear since the beginning, not just in the course of the negotiations over the ceasefire, but you saw the Secretary lay out last November in Tokyo principles that would guide the United States when it comes to the period at the end of the conflict. And first and foremost among those principles was that Hamas can never return to governance of Gaza, given their track record.
Let me ask you about, of course, the ceasefire. Now, it goes into effect on Sunday. That's 4 days from today. Is there anything that could stop the Israelis from bombing places in Gaza?
No, the ceasefire doesn't go in effect until it's effect. That's not
Sunday,
just a feature of this ceasefire. It's a feature of every ceasefire that's ever been
Right.
negotiated. There's a day in which they come into effect, and until then, there's nothing to stop either of the parties from
Right.
continuing the war up until the time that the ceasefire is implemented.
Yeah, but we have seen in the past, we have witnessed in the past, Matt, and because there have been so many episodes like this or wars like this, we've seen the Israelis go at it until the very last second. Do you expect them to go at it until the very last second,
I
or
am not
would you
gonna-
call on them not to do that?
I'm not going to speak for what they may or may not do. We want to see this ceasefire implemented. And that's what we're focused on, because as I said in my opening remarks, it does have the chance to finally bring enduring peace and stability, not just to Gaza and to Israel, but to the broader region.
Now, looking back, do you feel that this administration or this State Department has done everything it could to bring this thing to an end, to stop the suffering, to stop the killing of Palestinian children, men and women, and so on? Do you
Yes.
feel that there was a time that you could have probably, put your foot down, so to speak, the foot of the United States of America?
Yes, I absolutely do. And Saeed, I think that
actually do?
no, I'm
down?
answering his first question about it. Do we believe that we've done everything that we can?
Careful.
Yes, I absolutely do. And Saeed, I think one of the things that we have always been focused on in trying to get a ceasefire over the line is not just to get a ceasefire for a ceasefire's sake, but to get a ceasefire that would be enduring. We don't want to see a ceasefire that breaks down in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or even a year. We want to see a ceasefire that sets the stage for lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. And so it was important that we get that kind of ceasefire, and that's what we have put our efforts from day one into achieving. It is also important, Saeed, when you look at our overall policy, that we prevent the region from really tipping into all-out war. And when you look at the things that we laid out from day one, and this really goes back, you look at the things that the Secretary said the day after October 7th at the objectives that we were going to try to achieve. It was important that we continue to show that we are committed to the defense of Israel so that its enemies across the region did not see this as a moment of division and a moment of weakness when they could attack Israel and really plunge the region into the type of war that, as awful, as horrible as Gaza has been, would have extended that pain and suffering from Gaza into places all across the region. So that has also been another chief objective of our policy.
But Matt, when all is said and done, the real cause of all these conflicts, all these wars that happen from time to time, is the fact that the Palestinians continue to suffer. They have been displaced for 76 years or more, 78 years. So there was a great deal of of talk, rhetoric about a Palestinian state, about, finally the Palestinians living in dignity, allowing them. I think it was this administration or this Secretary of State that talked about the need for Palestinians to live in dignity and to have the same opportunities as Israelis and so on. What have you done to bring this about, to make it real, to set the road for this to, at one point to come about?
Let me start by addressing something you said in the run-up to your question about the suffering of the Palestinian people. One of the things that really has marked this conflict, let me put it this way. If you looked at the speech that the parents of Hirsch Goldberg gave back last August, I think it was at the Democratic National Convention, where they spoke about how there is a surplus of suffering across the Middle East. It's absolutely true. We have seen Palestinians suffer long before October 7th, and of course have seen them bear the brunt of this conflict. Palestinian civilians who did not start this conflict but have suffered the brunt of it. We've seen the hostages bear tremendous pain and suffering, and their families. We've, of course, the 1,200 people who were killed on October 7th inside Israel. As Hirsch Goldberg's parents have said, there has been a surplus of suffering. And we do fundamentally believe that the failure to realize the aspirations of the Palestinian people is one of the main drivers of instability in the region and one of the main drivers of suffering. And so I would urge you, Saeed, to look at the speech that the Secretary gave yesterday, where he talked about exactly what we have done and to unlock a political path forward for the Palestinian future. There are 3 stages that we see that are important to get to finally realizing a Palestinian state. 1 is a ceasefire, and we got there today. 2 is a day-after plan that starts to rebuild Gaza. And 3 is a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia, which provides Israel, hopefully, don't know if they'll agree to it, but actually provides Israel the incentives to agree to a Palestinian state. And we have put a lot of work into developing those plans and building support for those plans, and we are ready to hand those plans off to the incoming administration. Now, agreement on those will require tough choices, and I know everyone likes to point at the government of Israel, and it will absolutely require tough choices by the government of Israel. It will also require tough choices by the Palestinian Authority, which needs to make real reforms if it wants to win the support of its people, and it wants to win financial and diplomatic and other backing by countries in the region. So there are a lot of tough choices that people in the region are going to have to make to realize that vision of a Palestinian state, but we have done what we can to make those choices possible, and now it's up to leaders in the region to decide whether they want to take them or not.
2 quick points. One on UNRWA. UNRWA is slated to be banned from operating at the end of this month. Now, I know that this administration has decided not to fund UNRWA about a year ago until investigations are completed and so on. I believe that they have been completed. Are you worried that once UNRWA is banned from operating, that access of aid and so on and help that you talked about so much will actually be hindered a great deal?
So we are concerned about that, and it's why we called for the restoration of funding. You left one important thing out of the sort of TikTok there, Saeed, which is that we are now under a statutory ban by Congress from funding UNRWA. Yes. So we don't have the ability to turn funding to UNRWA back on. But we have called for that ban to be lifted so we could provide funding to UNRWA if we determined that they had appropriately implemented the reforms that are so important. Now, in terms of what happens going forward, so I can't speak, of course, for what the United States will do, because I'm cognizant of the sands shifting through the hourglass here. But UNRWA can continue to exist with funding from other countries, and I would expect that it will continue to exist with funding from other countries. And the United States can continue to fund humanitarian assistance to this Palestinian people through other organizations that are working inside of Gaza and throughout the broader region. Even after the United States suspended its funding for UNRWA back, I believe it was in the spring of last year, we have continued to be the chief funder of any country in the world for humanitarian needs for the Palestinian people, and we have done it through sources other than UNRWA. And there's there's nothing that prevents the United States from doing that going forward.
And finally, you mentioned the Palestinian Authority. Do you see any role for the Palestinian Authority? Are you in touch with them?
Yeah, we do see a role for the Palestinian Authority going forward. The Secretary mentioned that in his speech yesterday. We believe there are important reforms that the PA needs to make. But we do see a role for the Palestinian Authority in the governance of a reunited Gaza and the West Bank.